Okay, we're gonna reset here. We're gonna get started on starting with our briefing, and then we're gonna roll into the bill hearings. We're gonna get started before we get the Do It folks up. We happen to have a member of our own committee who spent a tremendous amount of time during session in her capacity as chair of joint committee that dealt with a lot of the AI issues. In fact, I think one of the briefings was 5 or 6 hours. And so before we turn it over to you all, I thought it would be important and helpful to have Senator Hester, just give an overview of some of the big issues that she came up with as a result of all these hearings and briefings during the interim. And then when she's done, we'll do a little Q&A, and then we'll bring the Do It panel up as well. So department, yes, as Vice Chair Kagan talks to me all the time about acronyms, Do It represents, and I'm not going to mess it up, it is the Department of Information Technology, aka Do It. Okay, Senator Hester, you've got whatever time you need to tell us whatever you want to tell us.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here with all my committee members. I had the distinct pleasure of hearing probably 10 hours of testimony over the interim on artificial intelligence, AI. And I'm just going to do my best to relay to you in 15 to 20 minutes what took me all summer to underscore. And I just want to start by thanking the staff of the Joint Committee, who are awesome, as well as I've got a few interns sitting behind me. I've got Aiden and my chief of staff, Damien, and Victoria and Bridget. So they've all been working on this all year long. So if you could switch to the next slide and make sure you're in presentation mode. How do we get rid of that thing? I don't know.
Sorry.
So while we're sorting that out, just the 3 hearings that we had were in June, October, and November. And in each one of these, we really wanted to look at the opportunities and the challenges. In the second hearing in October, we dove into the topics of education, consumer protection, labor, elections, and governance. And then on the 29th, we broadened our scope to go back to modernization. We had the, there we go, you got it now. And then we closed out that one by looking at the nexus of artificial intelligence and cybersecurity. So next slide, please. So I've broken today's briefing into 3 parts, kind of just a basic overview of artificial intelligence, not knowing where people were starting from, then going into sector-specific approaches, and finally, the different types of legislation that we have seen out there. So this was one of the first slides I was exposed to. It comes from one of the authors of the White House Bill of Rights. It's kind of a joke, but joking aside, a recent letter from the Center for AI Safety that was signed by over 350 AI executives, researchers, and company executives said that AI poses the risk of extinction on the level of pandemics and nuclear war. And it should be cause for attention that the people whose careers are dedicated to this topic are the ones ringing the alarm bells. And so, as I've studied this, I think that there are risks. I don't think the robots are coming to get us. I think that the technology is already here and we have to embrace it. But it is a big thing. It's like electricity or the first computer, or the first, handheld smartphone. Like it's going to make a big difference in every aspect of our lives. So the next slide gets at one of the biggest opportunities. So AI can have a really big impact on the economy. And one of the areas that I've looked at is increases in our global food insecurity and how we can start to feed more people. And the depth of science that artificial intelligence can go to, it can solve problems like this. At the same time, there's also over 520 different algorithms that have been approved in the medical field, and we're seeing major breakthroughs. So there's both, it's a balancing act, right? There's both this huge opportunity and some potential risks, and we'll get into the risks in a second. If we move on to the next slide, I think when it comes to the government's use of artificial intelligence, when we make decisions, it impacts thousands, if not millions of people. And so when we let AI have a seat at the table, it lets us streamline our day-to-day tasks and makes the process of government more efficient. At the same time, it carries these risks, right? And so any state definition of intelligence needs to, look at where we're using artificial intelligence in this area of consequential decisions. The graphic on the slide you're seeing now comes from California's AB 331, where they're looking at the decision the government makes that impacts people's lives. So employment, education, healthcare, criminal justice. It's not like just a technology issue. It's the use of the technology in the issues that we govern that are at the bottom of the risk and the opportunity. Next slide, please. So there's also been a lot of talk about how AI will transform our workplace. And it's a little hard to see on the graph, but on the far left, the purple bars, these are the areas across all jobs with a higher potential for automation. The middle section is for AI augmentation. And as we move down the list, the ones at the bottom, there's a corresponding increase in non-language tasks that are more difficult and cannot be automated. But to highlight the most noteworthy finding in this research, AI can improve more than half of all of our working hours in the office, in sales, computational, mathematical, business, and finance operations. So there's a huge increase in productivity that could be coming. So moving on to what actually is artificial intelligence. I liked this slide also from Professor Friedler at Haverford College. But the National Artificial Intelligence Act of 2020 said that a machine-based system that can, for a given set of human-defined objectives, make predictions, recommendations, or decisions influencing real or virtual environments. And so these systems are largely machine learning systems, which start with training data. And these are examples from the real world. And so the data that you want to, the patterns that you want to find, you want to copy and follow its patterns. For instance, if you were to create a machine learning system to screen job applicants' resumes, you would provide the technology with a higher or no higher decision and get the system to recognize that pattern. And then once the system takes that training data, there's a simple pattern finding algorithm that you can think of as a line of best fit. And it's important to note that there's humans making these decisions for the algorithms and the training data at every point along the way, but you're only as good as the data that you have. So if you put garbage in, you get garbage out. And that's where the risk of bias comes in. So that's the quick overview of the big picture of artificial intelligence. As I said earlier, it's going to be kind of touching every part of our lives. And so the question then for us around the committee room is like, how do we regulate it? And one of the best ways that I've heard it described is to start with a sector-specific approach. Like and if I wish Senator Carrozza was here, because she always asks, what is the problem we're trying to solve? And so in our second hearing, we looked at the specific problems and very specific issues. And so if you go to the next slide, you look at the whole area of employment. The poll that you see on this slide demonstrates that really Americans, they do not want employers to track their movements or their facial expressions. Americans also want to know that a hiring decision is also being made by a human being. And so knowing this, then kind of what are our options? This could include defining a list of employment-specific algorithms and setting out principles and asking the Department of Labor to issue guidance. And it's critical that we define the role of AI in labor because labor leads in the efficiency and automation hiring processes, allowing employers to make those decisions quicker. So once again, it's that balance of like, how can we use it to improve what we're doing, and also what are the risks that we have to guard against? The small screen grab on the right-hand side is from a 2018 issue that Amazon had when it was demonstrated that they were actively discriminating against women in the screening tool that they were using in their hiring application processes. So the next slide, we look at education. And by the way, I've got timestamps for all these. So if any of you want to go back and watch the actual experts talking about the education, it's like a 45-minute thing and it's really interesting. But the chart at the top left demonstrates how the use of artificial intelligence in education is growing with curriculum, with tutoring, with teacher development. The use of AI in education currently stands at the $500 million market value, and it's expected to grow 30% by 2030. And as shown as these three maps, AI curriculum is currently, this is the one on the far left, AI curriculum is currently being implemented in Baltimore County, here in Maryland, and in two other places across, at least two other places that this study found across the United States. Tutors are also being used in Cleveland and Newark, and teacher development is being used in Washington State, and here at home in Prince George's County schools. So I look forward to hearing what they're doing. On the federal level, President Biden's executive order called for the Secretary of Education to create resources that address safe, responsible, and non-discriminatory use of AI in education in consultation with stakeholders. The U.S. Secretary of Education plans to create and release an AI toolkit for education leaders in the coming year, and it will implement recommendation from the Department AI in the Future of Learning and Teaching report. So it's definitely here. You'll see up in the corner of the slide the benefits of AI in education, the drawbacks of AI in education, personalized education, teacher support, creativity, prompts, efficiency. Those are all on the positive side. You know, bias, over reliance, cheating, and job displacement are the risks that we face. Moving on to the next slide. I think Senator Watson asked a question at one point in one of our hearings about the nexus of cybersecurity and artificial intelligence. And I really feel like here we're at a particularly pivotal moment where Gen AI has escalated social engineering threats like sophisticated phishing and fake videos, and notably, often targeting older seniors and adults. But they're getting so good that sometimes at some of these SMS, text scams, I'm like, wait, is that true or not? You have to pay attention. At the same time, data privacy is at risk with Gen AI's dependence on large, sensitive data sets, potentially leading to data breaches. Yet at the same time, the defense, the cybersecurity defense of like our state government, is, AI can shine there. So we have to use AI to combat AI in the world of cybersecurity. Moving along to elections, here's another area where artificial intelligence can both help to spread misinformation, but also help to protect our elections. Obviously, AI played a pivotal role in the 2024 campaign cycle and potentially swayed foreign elections with serious geographical implications. Voters need to know if what they're seeing on the screen is accurate and truthful, and that is getting harder and harder and harder. One kind of core priority should be transparency, ensuring the need for labeling and watermarking. Last month, well, now a couple months ago, the U.S. Senate had a hearing on the subject. And the issue is that there's currently no standardized method of labeling content as artificial intelligence. So it's incredibly hard to figure out what's real and what's not real. The last slide in this section just kind of summarizes the unique risks and challenges that we face. So there's the workforce displacement challenge. There's kind of the snake oil thing, like is the output of this AI, is it really working? There's the confidentiality and security issues to monitor liability and compliance, and then bias and harm, which we've talked a lot about. So the last bit of this slide, this deck, talks about what's going on at the federal and the state level in terms of governance and legislation. On the slide in front of you is the blueprint for the AI Bill of Rights. And basically, this says that, it's a right for us to have safe and effective systems, to have discrimination protections, to have data privacy, notice and explanation that you are interacting with AI, and human alternatives upon request. This got worked into the executive order, which came out at the end of the president's executive order, which came out at the end of, and I think of October of last year. And there's some really good guidance on how the federal agencies can start to implement this in the Associated Office of Management Budget Guidance. Congress also has been acting or trying to act, although none of these bills have passed. There's some good content there. Senator Bennett's Assess AI Act would create a federal task force with officials from multiple cabinet agencies, while Senator Peters' bipartisan TAG Act highlights the need for disclosure of any interaction or critical decision made by artificial intelligence. Now, while neither of these bills have been passed, it remains an ongoing conversation, and there's been the subject of many AI insights and forums. So looking across the rest of the world, the European Union has emerged as the first entity to implement a comprehensive AI law with the hopes of ensuring that its development is trustworthy and human-centric. Their risk-based approach falls into three categories: acceptable risk, high risk, and kind of unregulated. And this has helped forge an agreement over the more controversial issues, such as facial recognition. The Canadian Parliament is also working towards a code of practice, primarily to protect personal information that would mitigate potential harm. China has also adopted a series of interim measures while pushing for regulation that goes beyond generative AI. So this last slide is a little blurry because I took it last Friday night at the NCSL policy conference. And so what they're showing here is that, states are, trying to fill the federal void. We saw at least 191 bills across 31 states have been introduced. They focus on multiple aspects of artificial intelligence, requiring governance frameworks, creating inventories of state uses, establishing task forces and committees, and addressing the government's AI use. However, only 14 of these 191 bills have become law. And so it's definitely kind of a work in progress. And there was a lot of talk at the NCSL policy committee about where we could work together to adopt common definitions and common practices. So it wasn't, it wasn't as patchwork as our privacy law currently is. The Maryland Center for Health and Homeland Security did a deeper dive on some of these bills for us. They looked at all of the bills that had dealt with governance, and they identified like 6 state advisory committee bills and 12 that have an AI task force. And we're kind of hoping to read the reports of all those task force coming out soon. The 4 that you see here, Colorado, Connecticut, Massachusetts, and Washington. The first 2 passed. Massachusetts is near passage, and they're hopeful on that one. And Washington is still kind of in the proposed stage. 14 states have laws prohibiting discrimination by AI, preventing or mitigating discrimination in often the healthcare or mental health space, and also with hiring practices. They often provide some kind of remedy for those who are impacted by discrimination, either through civil action or for the Attorney General. And here I just want to give a shout out to the Center for Equitable Artificial Intelligence and Machine Learning at Morgan State. This body several years ago set them up to look at this, and they've done incredible research in this area and kind of flipping the bias on its head and trying to use artificial intelligence to do, better research, in certain areas where the data sets are biased, but trying to overcome that bias and to find that health answer for those who are underrepresented, in that data set. Data privacy is also kind of combining, I might say, or colliding with artificial intelligence, because it's all, as I said earlier, garbage in, garbage out. If you got good data, then you can make better decisions. But the question is then whether that data is private or not. So a lot of the new privacy bills, you'll see little bits and pieces about how they're using that data in profiling. So this won't be in our committee, but I know that we will have a data privacy bill this year in finance. And I'm kind of at the end, but I just wanted to give you guys just, one of the tools that we talk about a lot in looking at these the algorithms is AI impact assessments. And so the language on the left is from the Connecticut bill. But really, at the time when you're either buying a new piece of software or creating, something that has an algorithm in it, there can be an assessment made, and you can list kind of what the AI is for, what the benefit will be, what the risks will be, has it been tested in a real world concept, and then, whether or not it's been independently evaluated. And once again, this goes back to those areas where there's the higher risk. Second to last slide here. What does this all look like? I think the New York City Action Plan is just an excellent example of establishing safeguards to allow for this responsible use of AI. The report succeeds in establishing kind of a central structure and governance, complete with roles, responsibilities, and capabilities. It coordinates an integrated action plan to establish expectations and standards related to the city policies and guidelines. And I really recommend, if you're looking for a concrete example, to check this out. Last but not least, the department is here to talk about the governor's executive order, which is fantastic. I love this quote. This technology is already here. The only question is whether we're going to be reactive or proactive. And I think it's spot on. You can't get away from it. It's here. And I think the biggest risk is that we avoid it. We do nothing. We need to use it to stay competitive and smarter and save money so that we can invest in other things. And as we use it, we need to make sure that we're doing it in a responsible, productive, and fair manner. So I think it's just a pivotal moment for the legislature to take this as a priority. And I think the executive order really sets forth a great tone for us to embrace this as a technology-loving state of Maryland in a way that leaves no one behind.
Okay, well, that was an excellent overview. I want to commend you for that. Before we open up for questions here, let me just make the broader point. I think like a lot of issues, the United States Congress, we're not necessarily looking to them as much as they should be acting. I think that's probably going to be up to the states to take the lead. And so the NCSL policy group that you referenced a few times, so just be a little more specific, is you're on that policy group, or what is the actual title if we wanted to, follow?
It's the NCSL.
Well, I know, okay, National Conference State Legislature, but the policy group specifically within NCSL.
I think it's the Cybersecurity Task Force.
Okay.
And this is the group that Susan Lee, that Senator Lee was on for years, and now I'm her replacement.
Okay.
But it's dealt with privacy, cybersecurity, and now AI. And it's a lot of these task forces are 2-year task forces. I think this one's been going for 10 years.
Gotcha.
So it's kind of a permanent fixture.
Well, one question that was sent to me just in terms of the states that you outlined, particularly with respect to AI regs, or is there any specific on the education space, which is within the portfolio of the committee? Is there some action in some state that we might want to take a look at modeling? Is there some particular piece of legislation, or even if it's some regulatory initiative in any of those states that you mentioned that we might want to take a look at for this session?
Yeah, I would love to dive deeper into that question. I think there must be those examples. I'm not sure if they were regulatory or just projects, but there is this list of recommendations at the federal level. And that's what the U.S. Department of Education is looking at, taking those recommendations and moving them forward. And so one of the things I've thought about is why don't we take those same federal recommendations and look at what that would mean in this context of Maryland schools.
Let's open up to any questions for Senator Hester. Obviously, she spent a lot of time this session on this topic. Senator Washington.
Yes. I love the research. I love the images. Thank you so very much. Just on that, we were reading the National Artificial Intelligence Initiative Act of 2020.
Mm-hmm.
Is that what you referred to, right? And so in the education space, we're talking about academic integrity and ethical use. So I think that's certainly, one thing that probably the colleges and universities and the role of these in the application process and, and all of those. That's one. But I wondered also another space is about private property. So I teach at MICA, so an art school, and artists started sounding the alarm a while ago because of the process that AI uses to learn, right? And so going out and just taking everything in to learn. So in that space, in the education space, and in the context of our virtual school or anything, have you heard or is there legislation out there around protecting the images of students, protecting the classes? I mean, you're saying the benefits of it, but if a teacher, is out there using a platform, right? They've not had the opportunity to consent to have their material being used as part of the learning for the tool, the AI tool that is now presenting courses, right? In other words, there's a way in which, any intellectual property images can be used without someone's permission. So is there any sense about having to opt in or opt out, or just how that's governed?
So last year, I remember us discussing the Wild West of virtual education. There is nothing on artificial intelligence.
Exactly.
There's nothing from somebody taking a student's IEP plan, putting it into ChatGPT, and then everybody can access it.
Right.
So I think that this is going to happen in every single sector. And I think the education sector, like MSDE, needs to sit down with the LEAs and with some people who know something about artificial intelligence and say, okay, these are the guardrails that we absolutely have to put in place as we start to use this.
I guess I
absolutely.
wanted to. So, and I definitely appreciate the sector specific approach, because you're right. Otherwise, the definition is vague. Because artificial intelligence, we sort of always have used it, like search engine, it's, so now we're calling it AI, but it's been a process that we've been using for a long time. So our sector of education is certainly, one, and protecting private property, intellectual property, the images of children, in the virtual world, the data collection and methods. I'm very frustrated. It seems like I can't opt out if I use Google or Bing or whatever. Every time I figure out a way to keep it from making suggestions, it finds another way. So I do think there shouldn't be the presumption that we are willing to participate, in this technology, because we are in fact consenting to having all of our moves and our information a part of its learning. Do you know?
Senator, I agree personally with you 100%. So there's two bills right now in finance. Okay. One that's a more comprehensive Data Privacy Act, and then there's the online kids design code or children's design code.
Okay.
I mean, they will be working themselves through the finance committee, and
great.
I certainly for one hope they both pass.
Okay, well, we should look at that. But yeah, that was and then the other question I had is about elections, which is another, or maybe the chairwoman is getting, okay, well, I'll just say elections and then just pass on. But that's another area, a sector that has to do with our, I haven't thought of the environmental one. Give me 15 minutes and I'm sure I'll think of it. But
okay, speaking of elections, we're going to go to the vice chair for some questions on elections. And then we also have the Do It folks, coming up after too.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And I echo Senator Washington's sincere gratitude to you, Senator Hester. Not only have you been a thoughtful leader and consistent and dogged, but you've been very kind to include and educate all of us. And when you had that day-long session, you reached out and gave us some idea of who's speaking when. And I was glad for the opportunity to join on and watch and learn for a part of the day. And so thank you for that. As Senator Washington says, and as you've indicated, AI has benefits and drawbacks. And our Secretary of Information Technology and her team is quite aware of both of those. You and I have talked about 911 and public safety, and there are opportunities to help triage some of the emergency calls that we get, and especially with inadequate staffing
Yeah.
at some of our 911 center, there is an opportunity in that. There are risks in terms of elections. And I wonder, your one pager here was great, but I wonder if you wanted to just expound for folks who are watching in the press or in the general public, because there is such a concern and frankly, a growing amount of cynicism. Sort of how could an average voter, how can any of us understand what's genuine and what's phony baloney AI?
Yeah, I appreciate the question. And I'm certainly not an expert in this area. I think deepfakes have been on the tip of everyone's tongue. What I can tell you is that I've talked to Jared Demarinis at the State Board of Elections, and he has a rather creative idea for requiring some kind of disclosure. So if you, if a deepfake is used in political advertising, you might have to report both the deepfake and the original to the state board.
Thank you, Lamaria. So to be clear, he has talked about some sort of watermark or almost disclaimer. There's been conversation about clarifying that this is not the original picture or audio or video, that these are words being put into the candidate's mouth and not actually what the candidate said. But it's complicated, and not everyone is going to see that watermark or disclaimer or understand its implications. So it is a little bit the brave new world in a lot of this. And I fear that elections are a place where it really is among the scariest, especially today. So I look forward to continuing the conversations with all my colleagues and to your leadership, Senator Hester. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, we're going to go to Senator Augustine.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Senator Hester, for all your work on this. Just, like the data sets that are growing, can you just walk me through that a little bit? Like where they are? Are they just, you know what I mean? Are you following me at all? So the reason why I'm asking it is I'm trying to think about like how we here in our state might be able to protect against whatever malicious use or perhaps bias that might work its way into AI. But the first question that I have is, where does it actually live?
So I think it might, if I might, I think one of our senior advisor for AI would be really a great person to help answer that question. But I think it goes back to like when you're thinking about state use. So then it could go back to the data, like if we want to look at the data for this specific population and health and whether we're going to release that or whatever for like, for health research, then you have to figure out whether in that specific data set there is a sense of bias or not. And then like the ChatGPT and based on like all the stuff on the internet, that's obviously biased. So I think you have to look at, where the data is coming from and how it's being used.
Follow up, as you and I have worked on the privacy stuff, we know from there become like other stakeholders who have come and sort of, who are the stakeholders that you've experienced or seen inside of this AI? Because I haven't done the AI way that we've done the privacy. Have any folks kind of approached you and that there are stakeholder groups that are part of this?
Yeah. There's a good deal of overlap.
Okay.
I've been, you can think about there's the government use, which a lot of what I talked about today is the government data, the government use, the government decision making, and how our benefits are given out. And then there's the whole private sector stuff, and whether or not like something you buy off the shelf is trustworthy and ethical. So I've kind of been thinking of them in those two separate buckets, and they have slightly different stakeholders.
That's helpful. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Okay, we're going to go back to Senator Washington for a quick one.
Question, thinking about the stakeholders, so there's government, but all users, like potentially all of our constituents. I guess I'm trying to, how are we defining how are you thinking about stakeholders? No,
It's
but
violating protocol here. No,
no, I just so that I can.
but we will yield to Senator Augustine to clarify what he
Okay.
means, how he defines.
Okay, sure.
specific-
I'm happy to do so. So what I'm saying, Senator Washington, is that when Senator Hester and I have worked on privacy, right? I mean, oftentimes we're looking at it there are different stakeholder groups who they want to share their perspective on on privacy in ways that we maybe aren't thinking about. So they're saying that, like, let's say that some protections might deter innovation and things like that, which I would imagine we're going to hear here too. And that's really where I was going with that. So when we're trying to think about how we want to protect Marylanders, others might say, well, yeah, but that's going to, it's going to prevent innovation that could then benefit us in these other ways. And so I was just trying to see if AI has matured and that people are using it in a commercial way, or people, that have identified some of those different groups of stakeholders in the way that we experience that with privacy. And privacy and online privacy, not just privacy, but like online privacy, where people have used online privacy to say, hey, we don't want, there needs to be certain freedoms there in order to allow for innovation and allow for other things to occur.
Okay, yeah,
I won't crosstalk.
we're good. You have another question for
Okay,
Senator Hester?
great.
Yes, for Senator Hester.
So I think one of the things to think about, Madam Chair of the Joint Committee, is that a lot of our constituents don't know that they're using AI. So that's kind of like, so those that have identified themselves as stakeholders perhaps are already in a position to say, well, I don't want it to interrupt my innovation, et cetera. But the extent to which my understanding that we are all contributing, to, as I said, I'm repeating myself, but the learning and the process, like the extent to which that these entities are able to just collect data, all online data, and use it, then we don't know, constituents don't know. So there's some proactive disclosures or something. I mean, I don't know the solution to that, but I think that that's what we can't just wait for folks to call foul. I think that we're in a position where we know and we represent our constituents, and we will have to be the de facto stakeholders to protect their interests. That's what I don't want to say, isn't that so? But since it's your colleague, I mean, are you thinking, do you think that fits with both benefiting from AI and all the things, but also recognizing an obligation to make sure that, the individual interests and privacy, and
I think it's going to be something that's going to be embedded in every single agency. So like if you get down to like the Maryland Insurance Administration, I mean, I know that the commissioner is actually looking at this and making sure that when insurance decisions are made, they're made with, with AI, that it's made in a non-biased way. And they're working at a national level on that.
but the data used,
So the data,
like AI doesn't work unless it's basically it's a big, somebody that's looking over your shoulder. So back in the day, it's like, don't look over each other's shoulders, right? So now we have the commodification and selling, and of a technology that is looking over everybody's shoulder, packaging it and selling it back to us. So again, very clear, I'm not against, I don't say this in some kind of, opposition, to its good uses, but to have a sort of reality check of what it's doing. So it's an
Absolutely.
extractive business. It's extracting, right? And not everybody, and for the most part, it is not with the permission. Now, it could be the case where a agency says, here's our data, analyze our data, produce some answers. It's
Why don't you
also
take,
not-
let me
I'm
just,
gonna
why don't you
miss
take a
Karen,
crack
yeah.
at that and then I
And then we'll
really
get
want to get to
somebody
do
else.
it because they might be able to.
Help.
I was just gonna say, I
Yeah,
think that
I
the
think they-
folks behind me would do a better job.
So why don't we do that? Why don't we bring up, I think this would be a good time, and thank you to the Senate President for joining us. Why don't we bring up Secretary, we've got Katie Olson Savage, Secretary of Information Technology, Maryland Department of Information Technology, and we've got Senior Advisor Nishant Shah, Senior Advisor for Responsible Artificial Intelligence at Do It as well. And so, Madam Secretary, I don't know how you want to, I apologize. What? Yeah. So, who wants to go first? I'll leave.
I'll be very brief. I'll just kick things off. Mr. Chair, Madam Vice Chair.
We have your
members
slide
of the committee.
and everybody should have a hard copy of your
Great.
PowerPoint and all that. So you heard the foundation laid by Senator Hester, and so now it's up, yield to you.
Great. Well, we appreciate the opportunity and appreciate the presentation. So as I said, I'll be very brief because I do want to yield as much time as possible to Nishant Shah, who I brought on in August as the state's first senior advisor for responsible AI. We are colleagues at the United States Digital Service together. So I just, before I turn it over to Nishant, my role as secretary is to create the conditions. I was at DoD before this, and it's a phrase that I really love, is to create the conditions. And none of this work, the goal is to create advanced user-centered technology for residents and executive agencies to use. So my goal, there's three ways I think we need to focus on to do that right now. So first is clarifying our products and service offerings. It's very murky right now, what is offered by Do It and what's available or what executive agencies are expected to provide on their own. The second is to mature our cybersecurity offerings. Likewise, it's sort of a blurry line around, in this process of managing cybersecurity centralized efforts more centrally. And then finally, launching a digital service team. We don't have the talent in-house right now to be able to develop and deploy technology like AI. Which is, should be concerning to all of us. It's important to me that we build out a staff of product managers, UI, UX people, and data scientists and product managers. So my role is to focus on these three things to allow experts like Nishant to deliver and develop advanced technology. So those are the three sort of macro goals of Do It, and within that, I think they work to support bringing in some of this more advanced technology. So I have an additional slide on how we've reorged, but in the interest of time, I will turn my time over to Nishant.
Thank you, Secretary Savage, and thank you to this committee for the opportunity to brief you on how we're thinking about AI. So I'll cover a few different areas. One, what is AI and what's the context that we're operating in? There'll be a little bit of, I think, overlap with Senator Hester's great presentation, but I think it'll help fill in a few gaps here and there as well. What are some of the inherent risks to leveraging AI? We'll speak a bit more to Governor Moore's recent AI executive order. We'll discuss immediate next steps that we're thinking through as we prepare to execute on the EO. And at the end, we'll open it up to questions. So, the definition of AI tends to be a sort of eye of the beholder thing rather than established consensus. There's lots of definitions, some philosophical, some technical, which will continue to change over time as the capabilities of the technology changes. So for purposes of this presentation, I propose that we use something just very high level, machines and software that mimic human intelligence to make predictions and perform tasks based on collected data, and that get better at doing so over time. And I think that's sort of the key part. I'll note that there is a more involved specific description in our recent executive order that we adopted from the White House's AI EO, which I think is quite good. In terms of the history, AI has been around in different forms since, honestly, the late 50s, often in academic research or industry labs. And in time, it got siloed into different disciplines: computer vision, natural language processing, robotics, expert systems. In the last 15 years, there's been a renaissance of sorts based on exploding data availability and cheaper computational power. In consumer technology, that's been the force behind a lot of highly visible features, some of which the committee members have mentioned in their questions. And I thought that going through one or two of them might be helpful to give a sense of how the technology works. So for example, when you go to an e-commerce site or streaming services, you often see a "you might also like" or "recommended for you" category. Those are based on algorithms or essentially just sets of rules that were trained on massive data sets that taught a computer program to do specific tasks, and in particular, to recommend, classify, label, or predict things. And so those algorithms can be fed with data like your purchase history, items you've viewed, products you've rated, things that folks with demographic and socioeconomic profiles like yours have tended to purchase, and spit out what in the catalog might be something that you'd like. Or you're shown ads from search engines or on social media platforms. Those companies take the plethora of data that's created when you use their services, when you interact with others on your social graph, and as you browse the web, and end up serving ads to the right folks at the right time in their buying journey that fit personas like the one that your data implies. And sometimes these can be so good that it feels like the device is listening, when in fact it's really clever machine learning based on granular insights from astronomically sized data sets. But, and I think a few folks have mentioned this in the questions as well, lots of people use these tools without actually knowing they're powered by AI. And so, the true liftoff in public consciousness in AI, I think, was just around 2 years ago with the advent of generative AI. And those were powered by something that we call foundation models or large language models. And the most famous there is OpenAPI's GPT-4. And that's made it very easy to create text, sound, images, video, 3D environments by essentially anyone. And that generative capability ended up having massive ramifications, huge potential and huge risks. And so now we're sort of in the midst of what will likely be years of breakthrough on speed, computational efficiency, predictive and reasoning capacities, alignment to model creators' intent, and something we call embodied AI, which is AI used in robotics and in things that are in the physical world. That'll lead to AI agents in the coming years, which will make, honestly, today's look positively ancient by comparison, and hopefully novel approaches for everything from materials discovery to digital twins of Earth systems for better climate modeling, to hyper-personalized tutors, to optimizing experiment design in synthetic biology. So the next slide. That's the really high level context, but as everyone in this room is aware, technology is a double-edged sword. So I think it's worth running through some of the risks here. The point of this slide, is really to say that the risks of AI without guardrails are real today, and they're often different from traditional software, so they need to be managed in unique ways. I'll speed through some of these, but happy to double click on anything in Q&A or separately. One common one is algorithmic bias and discrimination, as the senator had mentioned as well. Many AI models are trained on the public internet. That means they capture and reflect common biases that are present there. So if the AI system is making a decision on something, for example, and all things being equal, person A is treated differently than person B, and particularly if that's on the basis of some legally protected characteristic, that can lead to discriminatory outputs by the AI system with the moral and the legal consequences therein. Issues around privacy and cybersecurity often go hand in hand. I think some of these are more obvious. For example, folks can mistakenly hand over personally identifiable information, or what we call PII, in engaging with chatbots without knowing that they then get used in training data. Generative AI and deepfakes can enable more convincing phishing attacks and social engineering. And other things are more emergent and won't be an issue until one day they suddenly are. And so, an example of this is there's a study recently that showed it's possible to figure out what someone on the other end of a Zoom call is typing by applying a machine learning algorithm to the audio sort of afterwards or subsequently. On the misinformation, disinformation, and the deepfakes front, I imagine everyone in this room is pretty well acquainted with that. The ease and scale of producing this content will get much easier, and that's both because of the generative AI tools available, but also given the availability of increasingly strong open source models. And tactics like watermarking and disclosures and other techniques that we've discussed a little bit here are the tip of the spear in combating this, but the worry is that it'll be an arms race as ways around those tactics are continuously found as well. So I imagine that many of you have also heard the word hallucinations in context of AI. Generative AI can yield answers to prompts that are entirely wrong, but are presented so confidently that folks generally believe them to be true. There's something called model drift, where AI models that were once useful can perform poorly once the relationship between the variables in the real world change or the training data is outdated. And that's a significant problem if the model is being used to process insurance claims, for example, or choose what neighborhoods to redeploy officers. I'll also point out that there's, an increasingly number sort of what we can call ethical gray areas. And this is one of those buckets, I think, that encompasses new behaviors that society hasn't yet defined as good or bad. And so I think a good example from a few months ago is the news that Mayor Eric Adams of New York City robocalled thousands of constituents speaking in fluent Mandarin, Cantonese, and a number of other languages, of course, leveraging AI tools. Was it misleading that he convinced folks that he speaks those languages, or was it simply a great way to communicate with constituents? The final point I'll make on this slide is that AI capabilities are changing rapidly, and we tend to overestimate, what changes in a year, and we tend to underestimate what changes in 5 years. And the implication there is that new types of harms will continue to surface in the space. So this list will continue to grow, and in response, we need to adopt governance frameworks that are flexible and can evolve as the technology does. Next slide. So I think that naturally brings us to what we're doing about this and Governor Moore's recent executive order on AI. This EO was designed to build momentum and cohere synced action across state agencies to leverage AI responsibly and productively by state government. So, I think some of you may have read the EO already, but for those that haven't, I'll give a quick recap. The EO does 6 major things. First, it establishes the principles that internal use of AI should abide by. And that's really key to being specific in exactly what we're trying to govern in the first place. So these are fairness and equity, innovation, privacy, safety, security, and resiliency, validity and reliability, and transparency, accountability, and explainability. These sound like very high-level things, but they mean very sort of specific things in sort of the responsible AI literature. The second is establishing a governing body responsible for executing the EO and advising the governor. And, that ensures that we have a body that can make high-level decisions, that has the power to spin up working teams, and is accountable for moving forward the directives. The third thing is mandating, creating, and operationalizing a clear AI governance framework. And that includes both short-term stopgap efforts as well as a more medium-term action plan. Senator Hester showed the New York City action plan, which is a fantastic example of this, the sort of thing that we want to work towards. And in the meantime, we know that we'll need essentially shorter-term efforts to govern the set of requests that are being made today. Fourth is, mandates essentially to find a way to upskill the state workforce and get in short-term talent. And so this is necessary to ensure that the state can get the folks it needs for projects that require more deep expertise, as well as upskill workers in the state to use AI effectively and responsibly. Fifth, it asks for deep dives and recommendations in 3 key domains: economic development, workforce, and security. And the idea there is that we're doing the horizon scanning that's necessary for Maryland's specific contexts with regards to AI's impact, and to get prioritized specific recommendations, bringing together experts across disciplines and across sectors. The sixth thing, and the sort of final thing on this list, is it essentially asks for experimentation in the form of proofs of concept and pilots. And that puts us on the path to building our AI muscle and essentially ensuring the technology's benefits can be harnessed for Marylanders. Let's go to next steps. Next slide. So in terms of next steps, we're in the midst of building out an execution plan to get greater clarity on timelines, budget, working teams, et cetera, that we need to operationalize the EO. And we wanted to share with this committee how we're thinking about some of the more immediate next steps. The EO just came out last week, so I'll note that for almost all of these things, we're still figuring out the approach, and it's very much sort of like building the proverbial plane while flying it. So I'll frame this section more as the questions that we're thinking through rather than a detailed discussion of solutions. So in terms of building out internal and external partnerships and mechanisms, one of the most important elements of setting this EO up for success is having the right partnerships and processes in place. And that means setting up teams that can operate across organization boundaries with clear direction and decision-making, with access to experts and representative voices that can help guide them. And I really see this set of work as building the foundations on which our AI efforts can bloom, which makes it worth spending the cycles up front to get these things in place. So on the internal mechanisms, this is a brand new effort for the state. It's inherently cross-functional. So we need to ensure that we have the right setup to move forward on the work. For the sub-cabinet, the first meeting will be in a few weeks, and we're thinking through the types of decisions to make at each meeting and what its initial priorities are for the executive order. In parallel, we need to identify the right working teams for each initiative implied by the EO, and an AI lead for each agency that is responsible for getting information, for contributing to work streams, and operationalizing decisions within agencies. I think a great outcome here would be if we're able to foment a sort of community of practice across state agencies that's greater than the sum of its parts. And over the longer term, the question that we'll need to answer is, given our particular context, what types of roles and organizational structures make sense to facilitate AI governance and use? Who do we need in-house, and what existing structures can play dual roles or be repurposed? The answer, at least in part, I think, will probably go hand in hand with the establishment of the Maryland Digital Service, as well as the evolution of the governance, risk management, and compliance function within DoIT. On the external partnerships and engagement side, we know that we'll have to rely on partners to help us think through the next steps on both governance and product use fronts. One element of the EO, for example, is going deep into the domains of economic development, workforce, and security. And so we need to structure those efforts with clear expectations and then bring together the right combo of external experts and internal SMEs to move them forward. With academia, we're blessed to have amazing institutions in Maryland with deep AI expertise. So we're in conversations with a number of different universities to figure out how best to partner as advisory bodies, as experts providing input and research into specific domains, as short-term talent to push forward specific initiatives that require expertise. I'm aware that I have 2 minutes left and I have a bunch of slides. And so I think what might be useful here is just me to run through the top line of each slide and then maybe see if there's like a question that I can answer at the end. Other things that we're looking to do in terms of next steps are flesh out and operationalize each principle. That's where the vast majority of the work will be. That's where each one of those principles means something in terms of how technology manifests and how we procure and how we do risk assessments. We want to better understand current use and create an inventory, and we have a pretty good sense of what's being used now. So I was going to go through some of that, but can also send that as documentation. We want to issue generative AI interim guidance in order to unlock some of the use of these sort of more popular tools. And then finally get to use cases and experimentation, which will be the whole point of all of this in the first place, to bring the benefits of this technology to our residents. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. That was all excellent. Any questions, Madam Secretary? That's the extent of the DoIT testimony. Okay.
Yes.
Okay, we'll take questions at this point. Senator Brooks.
Thanks, Chair. First of all, I want to do a shout out to Sarah, stand up. Allow me. She was in the House. She was my chief of staff. Yeah. And then she went on to greener pastures, and now she's expecting her first. So congratulations, Sarah.
All right. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Any additional introductions, comments? Any, Senator Hester? Any? Okay, we've got Senator Washington. Senator Washington.
Thank you. Again, thank you both so much, and thanks for giving us an opportunity to ask a lot of questions. I think I just want to roll back a little bit because we're talking about how to use, et cetera. I just want to sort of explore some of the questions that I started to raise. So first, you referred to AI governance and use, and from what I understand, there's frameworks. So if you could talk with us about what the framework, because this is what constitutes the government, right? The steps before we get to the governance and use. So what are some of the frameworks? And then what would be the actionable principles that states should consider, when we're developing these governance?
Absolutely. There's a few great pieces of guidance out in the world right now. One of them is the risk management framework by NIST. And so this essentially lays out a set of principles. And for each one of those principles goes through, what does that look like to operationalize in practice? What are the set of artifacts or processes or technologies that you should have in place? And what are the outcomes that users of those technologies should essentially expect? There's also the AI Bill of Rights, which is another fantastic one. And the AI Bill of Rights takes sort of a rights-based approach to saying that, okay, for another set of principles, what should, from a fairness and bias perspective, what should be minimum required thresholds and standards that any human who leverages an AI system should be able to expect from it. So those are two very famous ones, and those are the ones that sort of were the primary underpinnings for a lot of the work that we've done. If you look at the AI executive order from the White House more recently, it also draws on those two, but then sort of takes that further and does the same set of things, which is essentially lays out a set of principles and then notes how those principles would be operationalized and what it looks like for those to be met or set some bar there. And so that's sort of the trend here, that there is a set of principles, that there is an approach to making all of those principles real, and a belief that if those principles are adopted, then we believe that the set of mechanisms would be sufficient in order to consider it responsible. And so that's sort of the super high level approach that we're thinking through with leveraging this. And so I mentioned 6 principles that are put out into the EO. Our next step is going in depth in each one of those principles and essentially saying, okay, what does it actually look like for privacy in the way that we've defined it to be operationalized for our residents? And where in the set of life cycles and do its processes at procurement, on ongoing use, on deprecation. You can imagine there's a whole sort of full product life cycle at which data is collected at different points and which privacy decisions are manifested. So where in that workflow should we be integrating sort of these AI standards? And how do those show up in the world in terms of contract language, for example? So if we buy software from vendors, if there is a certain quantitative bar that shows that upon purchase, from a fairness perspective, that our bar is met, what should that bar be? What should that metric be? And therefore, should there be a requirement for the vendor? And we should include that in contract language potentially. And so, that's a set of essentially procurement standards and rules that would be required that take into account these principles and embed them into how we purchase and leverage technology.
This might not be Dewitt's question. Certainly, it's not alone, but from a broader policy perspective in terms of an approach, what seems to be missing is the steps around managing it. There's sort of a belief that if we put the put the principles in place, et cetera, that everything will work out. And so, we hear over the next 80 some days and working with the administration and our committees open, so what are some of the very practical management? Of particular concern for me, is and we sort of just mentioned it, is the training, the AI training, how it's being trained and the data and information that's being used. And then also, frankly, that there is a value to the personal data of our constituents, so they're and all of this. And so how do we protect Marylanders? So I know I'm stepping outside of the use of it, but I do think we need to explore understanding that this is an extractive, this data is being taken and it can value from pennies to hundreds of dollars per person every day, and that is being sold back to us. And so how do we protect Marylanders from unknowingly or knowingly having their data collected and being used without their knowledge? So California just passed a piece of legislation around that, but it just seems like that needs to be a part of the scenario. So when we're looking at our contracts, if we have a contract with a program that is in our a virtual school program, that they don't have the right to use that data and to sell it. That if there's protecting you all, looking at all the ways in which the state collects data and that our constituents provide information, and we just don't know that. So what are all the different ways we need to protect the use of their data as part of the training, not just of our own, but of others. So it's looking, I guess, developers, I guess, are the ones that would do that. They'd secure an AI and then they teach it, right? And they buy it, they buy information, or they just take it, they steal it. So, or just take it. So is that part of
Sure.
what you're thinking about?
Sure. So it's a great question, and I'm trying to think about how we mature. There are certain processes that do it that we need to mature to better all the way we use and govern all technology, not just AI. AI is one set of technology. So to your point, my second priority is around maturing our cybersecurity efforts. We don't have a very mature software review process in place right now that, to your point, we shouldn't even be down the procurement path before we've started talking with the company about what are the third party risks? What are your terms and conditions? How do you absorb the data? So for example, we've gotten tons of requests to use Otter AI, which is probably, arguably one of the best sort of transcription softwares out there. But there's, we're not in a licensing agreement with them right now. So if something goes wrong, or if there's a data breach, how do we think we don't have an account rep to call, so that's the type of thing that we need to, to Nishant's point, start to bake into the way that we review software and to the way that we procure things. So that's something that we're going to be maturing, and that's part of the reason that, we're maturing the cybersecurity team. And to your point as well, we don't have security engineers right now as part of the team. It's not even a classification in the state. So to be able to pressure test that technology, we need to bring that talent in house, which is why we're launching the Maryland Digital Service in parallel. To your point around privacy, you're working very closely with the state's chief privacy officer to be able to figure out what that is. We've had some opportunity around some of the data breaches earlier this spring to put in place some of the templates around notifying people around a data breach, of their information. But I think, to your point, we're trying to figure out how we can more proactively, it's still early enough that there's not, so Montgomery County, for example, has an AI chatbot that they're using really effectively, to Senator Kagan's point around, as a part of their 311 system. And as we start to utilize something at the state level, which is the goal, we need to think about what are some of those disclaimers, and how do people know, that they can trust this, that it's an authentic site. Because I think that there's a ton of potential in being able to utilize that. So we'll be working really closely with Kat, with the chief privacy officer on that. But it does, kind of tack back to how we think about procuring the software in the first place. What are the, when we're in the sort of contract negotiation phase around, T's and C's and third party risks, that's really the time, terms and conditions, to really be ironing them out. But Nishant, I don't know if there's anything you would.
No, I think that's absolutely right. And we know there'll be a number of processes and artifacts that we need to adopt at different stages of that life cycle that I mentioned. Risk assessments are one of those. So risk assessments are essentially, you take at intake, most likely, you take the information about the given problem and the system, and you classify it into some high or low risk bucket. And there's a bunch of inputs that go into whether it is a high or low risk bucket. If it's a high risk bucket, that means it has a different set of standards and requirements and oversight associated with it. Absolutely. Yeah.
Understand, and I'm nodding when you are using language that perhaps I understand the context, but I'd prefer to.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. So for example, if it's a decision made on housing or credit, or if it's anything that leverages someone's biometrics, you can assume that that is a high risk, area, because if that data gets out, or it's not secured properly, or one of a million other things that can happen if people have access to your biometric information, there's a lot more oversight that should be required there versus, let's say, just a small productivity change within an agency.
Can I ask you just one, is it possible to opt out So this is the other. So when we're thinking about using these technologies, is it possible to not require that everyone allow themselves to be a part of the extractive economy that this is, and still get the services they need? I mean, it's a long way from our discussions about cash and check and online and debit, but it's like we went all online, and then we realized, oh, we can't do that. People who use cash. And so, this is traveling at such a speed that, to just we're just sort of jumping to, we're going to use this. Whereas the risks or the right to not participate is really to not have your data in this system, I think is something. Is it possible to do that?
I mean, I would say, some of the roles on the digital service team are to your point, it's not just, we're facing those with the sort of advent of all technology. We don't want to jump right from, if we've been entirely paper-based to entirely online, and we can't expect that everyone's going to come along that journey. So part of the role of having, the digital service launch at the same time as the AIEO is to have experts who can kind of journey map, like, what does that look like? And if people want to opt out, if they're not online, if they're not comfortable being in a sort of a digital world, what are the alternatives? What does that look like? So I think it's something as we, the EO calls for us to pilot some things exactly for this reason. So we can sort of think through, what are some examples, some tactical examples, whether it's, in the predictive analytics space or in the, constituent services space. And those really, those questions around privacy and opting in and opting out are going to come up. As well as, what is the digital capacity of people to participate? And we don't want to jump entirely
and let's just lastly, again, keep the monetization of these data, right?
Right.
And again, essentially it's owned by the individuals, and then the monetization of that data.
Right.
And then we participating in the monetization of their data.
Right.
Without their knowledge or benefit. And so I think thinking about ways that is valid, there could be, maybe not engage with selling our data, having prohibitions about those types of things are really important.
I think that's some of the, going back to the terms and conditions, in the sort of negotiation phase, that absolutely.
Thanks.
Okay, so here, don't forget, we have some bill hearings today.
Yeah.
So we're going to go to Senator Augustine, Senator Hester, and then Senator Simoneri. You're going to have the last word, and then we're going to move to our first bill hearings of the session. I think that's so. Senator Augustine, you're first up.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. It's good. Thank you all for the presentation. Have you all, is there any statutory changes that we might need to do or that may need to be done that you all have thought about, some action that we would potentially take this session?
I think certainly. I know Nishant has worked really closely with a number of legislators. So I don't know if you want to speak to some of that.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of things to put in place that would certainly be helpful for us as governance artifacts to leverage to do the work that we just sort of described here. One is, for example, an AI inventory or requiring an AI inventory, potentially in statute. Another is a definition in statute of artificial intelligence. So it's very clear sort of what systems would make the cut and what wouldn't, because in a lot of this work, the devil's in the details. And so getting that sort of set would make it a lot easier to sort of know what's included and not. I think those are two very big things. A lot of this that we're talking about is sort of on internal use, but also, outside of internal use, I think the most useful thing that we could do this session is data privacy legislation that would underpin just so much. And so I think honestly, if we could get that done, that would be probably the most useful thing. And outside of that, there are sort of harms that happen by AI. There's revenge porn or deep fakes therein. You can imagine that it might be useful to have penalties for that sort of work. And so that's not really internal use. That's more implications on the consumer side, but also, important to consider.
You've shared that with legislators who are going to potentially bring that forward in this session?
We've been working on the internal use side
Okay,
with legislators.
all right. Thank you.
Okay, Senator Hester and then Senator Sumner.
Thank you. And Secretary Savage and Nishant, it's been really great to work with you and thank you for the invitation to the EO. My question was about data privacy. So we realize that the data privacy bill that governs what companies are going to do will go through finance. That said, we had an executive order several years before you came that created our chief data officer and our chief privacy officer. That also required a data inventory. It's my understanding that the data inventory hasn't been completed. It's a work in progress. And so as we think about protecting our own data, like it just seems so important that if the data is going into the AI, we know what data we have. And so my question is like, what would be most helpful, like to ensure that we know where the public's data is being stored so that we can protect it, and if we're going to use it appropriately.
Yeah, so my understanding is that the data inventory is near completion, so we can certainly provide a status update for you on that. That said, it is really reliant on agencies to report, to self-report. And going back to what I was saying earlier, there's a little bit of a gray area around DoIT managed applications, as you know, and executive branch managed applications. So there might be applications that are developed that are sitting on our servers that no one is paying attention to. So that's the next sort of round for us. We're relying, the data inventory right now is sort of relying on self-reporting to sort of do our own independent validation of that, and to look at what's coming in from the agencies, what's sitting on some of our servers, and finding other ways to sort of tease out where things are, because we do need to harden that.
Would it be helpful to codify that requirement that the agencies report?
We can. I think that it would certainly be helpful. My understanding is that there is some of that language, but would love to work with you to strengthen that if we feel like it's not there.
Cool, thanks.
Okay, Senator Simoneer, you'll have the final word and then we're going to move to bill hearings, okay?
Thank you. It shouldn't take more
After
than
a 5
30
minute break.
minutes here. No, I'm just teasing you. This is interesting and I appreciate the presentation. I think both of them were very well done. I've been in the computer science industry for 35 years. And back when I first started, we had AI projects. So it's come a long way since then. But I think one of the eye openers was the 2020 documentary on social dilemma and just the data harvesting and questionable ethics that brought out how AI can be used. I know they've done some changes to that. But I'd like, from our standpoint, we do deal with statutes and we fix that. And from yours, from a department, you deal with the policy and work coordinating with other departments. And I'll probably take some of this offline, but I'd like to get your thoughts on the private sector as well. What we can do with that. I think that's a little more challenging than guarding our own data that we have here. And then the last thing I'll ask for is at some point, if you could provide me or the committee with a priority list that you have from your department. I know there's been a transition and I've heard some comments, we're going to mature the process and things. It's a nice way to say it. But I was a little surprised that, the software procurement and a lack of what they were doing.
Yeah.
And what you see as the most pressing needs to get to where you want to get to. So you can answer those offline, but if we could get back together.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you. So we need to take a 5-minute break for a reboot, reset. So why don't we reconvene back